Hello, my name is Elizabeth Martin. I am doing a presentation on education access for deaf individuals in any education setting, but mostly I will be focusing on college and universities. In order to understand deaf education, you need to understand the history of deaf education. Deaf education was a major topic since Aristotle. Deaf people were often labeled dumb and not intelligent. Deaf people were an embarrassment to society. Over the many years, deaf have become an experiment to find a cure so they can be part of the hearing world. There were two people, Abby Charles Michael DLP, who was the father of the deaf, and Louis Lawrence Murray Clerk. In 1760, had opened a institution in France to allow deaf people to come and to learn to use some sort of communication to be able to communicate with God. At that time, it was very important that religion, that there was a way to be able to communicate to God, or else all was lost. Epi was a he was a reverend, a priest who did that. A little story behind Clark. He tried to learn how to speak, but gave up and returned back to signing, and that is how the word got around that school was very successful. And Coswell, who is from America, who has a daughter who is deaf, her name was Alice, with Reverend Thomas Galliette, went to Europe to find hope and some sort of way to get education for Alice. Eventually, Coswell and Gallaudet saw Clark and realized that's what they want. They want Clark to come back and teach the school and set up at the school. They came back to America and established the first school, Connecticut Asylum for Hartford, for instruction of the deaf and dumb person. That is currently the old picture of the school. There is a school still standing there. It has now been relabeled to American School for the Deaf. In 1856, Gallaudet University was established. This is a university for the deaf. They are the Britons. In order to also understand education, you need to understand the background between ASL and oral education. They each give a distinct way of how deaf people are taught and why there is such a delay in academics for the deaf people. For some reason, hearing people have a hard time realizing that we deaf know exactly how to do things, that we know how to be intelligent, and we know how to do education. I think it's because they were uncomfortable with the idea of communication with hands. For centuries, even today, there's debate on what's better, ASL or oral learning. In 1880, it was an important year in the deaf history. There was a conference in Milan. We call it the Milan Conference. And that was a time when everybody got together, different countries and America got together to decide what was better to teach, sign language or oral. And there is a little video here that explains it more in detail if you are so inclined to learn more about it. But the purpose of this conference was to show that oral education was much better. And they ended up voting. Everybody, the majority of voting except for America, there was only 5 people that went. And the purpose of oral education was restoring deaf youths in social life and for giving them greater facility of language. Oral is taught to develop social skills of deaf students. Their primary goal was not education. And that is very true. Even today, when you go to an oral school for the deaf, academics is very, very limited there. they focus only on oral and make sure that that child can learn how to speak than really to learn how to do the academic. And oftentimes you'll find them behind or delayed, and so when they enter college, they have to do catch up. Things that was after that ban, a lot of schools were shut down, and that was known the Dark Ages. Dark Ages lasted all the way up until the 1960s, when the Civil Rights Movement began. As we all know, the Civil Rights Movement was a movement to allow Blacks to go to school. It also paved the way for disability to be able to mainstream in the schools and not go to some different institution, so that way their parents don't have to drive them so far away. It was also right to allow children with disability to be accepted in some way. Jordan King said the following: individuals should not be deprived of legal, civil, educational, or economic rights. After the 1960s, the Civil Rights Movement, people started flocking to schools. Again, here's another debate of whether or not ASL is truly a language. And William Stokey himself was invited by Gallaudet University, remember this university was for the deaf, to teach English. And he never met a single deaf person in his life. He didn't know any type of sign language. He just accepted it and went to a university to teach. And he realized that there is no way to communicate to them, so he began to observe the students in their communication of sign language. And he noticed that they had a common pattern within the English spoken language. So he decided to do his research project on sign language, and he created the first ASL dictionary, and because of him, he had come out and had said that sign language was a language. And because of that, there was a rise of learning ASL. There was a rise of using ASL as a mode of language, and there was a rise of interpreters movement, meaning interpreters started getting bigger and bigger and bigger to be able to provide the needs for the deaf students. After this, after the Civil Rights Movement ended, there were still problems with disabilities having equal right to education, which leads us to the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. This was the first act to give equal education. It supports and promotes the rights of individuals with disabilities. This allows students to get full access to school and public activities and events. And it also allows students who have disabilities to be able to go to college without any problems, so to speak. There's a little section in there called Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. It's more focused on deaf education, but it also allows education, their plans that they have created in elementary, whatever plan that they created in elementary, to carry with them into college. The only way anyone can get the 504 is if they have a disability. They have to label themselves as a disability. For a deaf person, that's a very hard thing to do because we don't see ourselves as a disability. We see ourselves as the person who just can't hear. It is not a disability, and it's a really hard thing to want to say we have a disability when we have our hand and are able to communicate with really anyone. But this allowed us to get appropriate access, which includes appropriate mode of communication, longer times on tests, note-taking, other accommodations that help disabilities to succeed in school. Now, it can go into college once they graduate high school. The schools will only allow it, schools have to follow it if they receive some type of federal funding, meaning Pell Grant, student loans. Colleges have to follow the Section 504 and the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. At the post-secondary level, the recipient is required to provide students with appropriate academic adjustment and auxiliary aids and services that are necessary to afford the individual with disability and equal opportunity to participate in the school program. Recipients are not required to make adjustments to provide aids or services that result in fundamental alteration of the recipient's program or impose undue burden. Meaning, if I request an interpreter, I don't have to pay for that interpreter. If I request a note taker, I don't have to be the person who pays that interpreter by hour, or that note taker by hour. The 504 is what put that in place. Kind of go back in history a little bit and following the timeline of disabilities rights, we're going to talk about Gallaudet University just a little bit. In 1988, there was a process of getting a new president at Gallaudet University. And there became a huge protest because it was Elizabeth Zinger, who was picked to be the university president. Even though she was a candidate, even though there was 4 candidates and 1 person was deaf, people thought for sure that the deaf person would become the new president, because it was about time. I mean, Gallaudet University never had a deaf president. And when it was announced that Elizabeth Zinger got the candidacy, there began to be a protest. Media, newspaper, all eyes were on the deaf population. And it was the first time that the deaf had a voice. We were fighting against something we knew was wrong. There was 4 students by the name of that had labeled themselves the Ducks. They were the main people against the protest who caused and house strings, and they had 4 demands: that Elizabeth Zinger must resign and a deaf person is elected president. Jane Bowman must step down as a chairperson of the Board of Trustees. Deaf people must constitute a 51% majority on the board. There would be no reprisal against any student or employee involved in the protest. We won, and Jordan King became the first deaf president at Gallaudet University. Which leads into the American Disability Act of 1990. There were a lot of lawsuits going on, even though we did have a law for disability to be able to get equal education, Section 504. It wasn't detailed enough, and there were a lot of lawsuits going on. So Congress had decided to need more detailed, which created the ADA. The ADA law was signed in 1990 as well as again in 2004 by President Bush. This law was a major breakthrough for all disabilities to have access to legal protection, to ensure them equal opportunities and access to the mainstream of American life. There are 5 titles that are related with the ADA. Equal employment, that is related with a person with disabilities being able to have the right to get equal employment. Non-discrimination in public places, accommodation in all public and private, telephone services and legal fees, and who pays for what, etc. We will focus on 2 of them, Title II and Title III, non-discrimination in public places and accommodation in all public and private. First, we'll talk about Title II. Title II, go back here. Title II is more related to access to public places, meaning services, concerts. When an interpreter, when a deaf person asks and requests for an interpreter, they must provide it. Programs and activities, events. However, we are not the person that pays for it. That's where Title V comes into play, where it shows that the person who's sponsoring that event or program or concert must provide the interpreter. Title III is more related to education. Allow all access This means that people with wheelchairs must have access to a university, bathrooms being big enough, ramps. Blind people must have access to signs that are in Braille. Deaf people must have the right set of mode of communication given to them, including interpreters, type well technology, closed captions, all those things. Understand that when you're talking about a public university that is federal granted money, and therefore they are the ones who pay for the interpreters. I don't have to pay for anything. There has been a lot of lawsuits, even recently, with these laws in place, because universities want to try to find a loophole because they don't want to pay for services. They don't want to take their money and use it in a place where they think is not appropriate. So, we're going to talk about 2 lawsuits. Zach Featherstone, he is deaf, who was accepted in medical school. And the medical school, this high prestigious medical school, said, oh, you are asking for services that we don't have. We were going to have to delay you from coming to school until we can get those services. He agreed, but also ended up getting a lawyer because that is wrong. Eventually, Zach was told by email that he would not be accepted in school because he was according to the doctors, were afraid that Zach was in harm with the patients, meaning because he's deaf, he can harm the patient because he doesn't know what's going on. With us deaf people, we can make any hearing situation into a deaf-friendly situation. And that's what Zach was trying to do. Zach did take it to court, and the school had to provide interpreters. He is now graduated and is doing his residency and is doing awesome. We like when deaf people fight for these rights because we always can use more deaf people to have jobs like this, doctor. So we don't have to keep going through an interpreter. Utah State University lawsuit. The students got together and sued Utah State University for not hiring qualified interpreters. There is a standard of what interpreters must pass. You must pass certain levels to get certain type of certifications. Utah State University were hiring people that did not have certification, the appropriate certification, and students went against Utah State University, and now the students have won, and Utah State University is now requiring to hire qualified interpreters. Jordan King said the following: differences among deaf people are okay, but we need to recognize those differences and work together. Now, DeMarco said, I think the biggest misconception that people think deaf people are not able to do things. What's more is needed. We need better access to interpreters. We don't have enough interpreters, but not enough schools are offering deaf studies or interpreters program. More schools need to offer that. Instead of just a few schools here in Utah, Washington, D.C., New York, Texas, we need more schools around the United States that have programs that are access to interpreters to teach. More campuses needs to be knowledge about deaf culture. Campuses need to be aware of disabilities and offer closed captions on their TVs. Need to give more access to teaching teachers how to work with deaf people. Oftentimes I go into a class and I have an interpreter, but this was when I was doing my undergrad, and hearing teachers were often confused why I had 2 people with me. And one teacher, I remember her saying my interpreters were not allowed to class because they weren't students, and I had to fight for that one. We want more easy access to different resources. Instead of just having an interpreter, we need more than that. We need access to a note taker. But we also need access to technology, using TypeWell, where 2 laptops are given to a student and to another person who is typing word for word of what the teacher is saying. It's hard for a deaf person to focus on interpreting and trying to take notes. And so we need more easy access without having to fight for our rights. We need more deaf teachers hired in a large population of deaf that attend the college. At Utah Valley University, there were about 50 students. All the teachers that were deaf were related with deaf studies. We had several deaf students that were doing art or criminal justice or social work. And what is so wrong about hiring a deaf teacher in a hearing setting? We have ways to work around it to make hearing students comfortable around a deaf teacher. These are my references. There are a lot of them. I hope you learned a little bit more about deaf education. And I hope in the future that as I do more deaf education, that you guys will come to understand how deaf education greatly needs to improve.